The Doctor. In the TARDIS. Next stop, everywhere.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Charles Skaggs, back in the TARDIS once again, ready to talk some Doctor Who, some classic Doctor Who, with special guest companion, and please help me with your last name because I don't want to butcher it. Jo Karelja?
It's Karelja.
Karelja. I'm sorry. But thank you for setting me straight. If I was a professional, I would have probably asked you that before we started recording.
Right? No, it's okay.
But see, this is the amateur hour, so you get me. So Karelja, thank you so much. I feel bad for butchering your name all this time. So and welcome to Next Stop Everywhere. I hope you're getting ready to talk some Doctor Who as we talk The Invisible Enemy. And this was an episode that you suggested, Jo. And I'm definitely looking forward to talking about that with you. So right off the bat, why don't you just give us a little background about your Doctor Who background and what made this episode kind of stand out for you about wanting to talk about it?
Okay. Well, I am relatively new to Doctor Who. I'm almost ashamed of myself for only having discovered Doctor Who in 2010.
It's never too late.
It was. You're right. It was. I had just lost my job, and I was bored and feeling sorry for myself, spending a lot of time on the couch, watching Netflix, and I came across Doctor Who, and it triggered a memory for me of sitting in my living room, back in the 70s, watching our 13-inch TV and seeing this image of the Fourth Doctor, the hat and the scarf and around the console, and watching it for a few minutes and thinking, well, this is weird. I wonder what this is, and I was a very young child, but and that was that. And it never went anywhere. I didn't know what it was and didn't continue watching for whatever reason. It wasn't really a thing in my life at that time. But in 2010, I had that memory and went, Doctor Who, is that? I hear, I remembered it being a thing in science fiction. I've been a lifelong science fiction fanatic. Loving all of the Star Wars and Star Trek and, all those things. And I thought, well, I'll check this out, see what Doctor Who is all about. And I started with Rose, started watching it, and that was the end of this.
So Rose hooked you.
Yeah, absolutely. In the first, moments, and then I just binge watched everything that was available on Netflix, which I believe was up to about The Big Bang.
Right.
The end of season 5.
Right.
Just literally binge watched it in less than 2 weeks.
Excellent. That sounds perfect. So does that make Christopher Eccleston your Doctor, or is it David Tennant?
Christopher Eccleston was definitely my first.
Right.
And I love them all. I don't know how to call any one of them.
You don't have a favorite.
I don't think so. I really love them all. I love especially all of the Doctors from the New Who.
Yes. So the New Who Doctors are your personal favorites.
Yes, they are. Although I fell in love with Tom Baker when I started. When I had finished everything that there was to finish in New Who at that point, and was waiting for new stuff, season 6 to come around. that's when I started looking into finding episodes of Classic Who, which was
Okay.
difficult to do, but started watching them. Started with Tom Baker and just loved his quirkiness and loved everything about him, and watched most of his episodes first, and then went on to some of the other Doctors.
So was that a bit of a shock to you then, going from newer Who with better special effects, faster pacing, to go back to the classic era where it's the opposite, where you have, hour and a half long stories and or more, and shall we say less than spectacular special effects?
Well, I would say yes and no. I was expecting that because, I grew up in the 70s and was familiar with that sort of television, loved the original Star Trek and, Lost in Space and all of those super cheesy old science fiction shows.
So you could appreciate that.
Absolutely. I appreciated it. And of course, yes, I absolutely appreciated it and knew what it was for what it was. So I didn't have a problem with it at all.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. So, yeah, see, I was the reverse. I grew up watching the classic era and appreciated the cheesy special effects. I realized that the BBC didn't have the greatest budgets, and so then when New Who came along, I was just like, wow, this is Doctor Who with a budget. It's amazing.
Right, right. Well, and that's the thing that I actually have a special place in my heart for the cheesy stuff, especially when it's British for some reason. The British tend to be able to get away with the cheesy stuff more than the Americans. I don't know why. But I remember watching.
Well, they're more eccentric than we are. So.
Yes. So I remember watching The Invisible Enemy for the first time and thinking to myself, what is happening right now? The Doctor just cloned himself and then shrunk himself and then had himself injected into his own brain to go walking around in his own brain, looking to have a conversation with this virus that had infected him. And I thought, and I remember feeling so excited and going, oh my God, this is the most cheesiest, wonderful, crazy science fiction story I've ever seen. And I actually ran down to my son and his wife's house and told them all about it and was going, you won't believe what I just saw on Doctor Who. So that's why I chose this episode.
Well, that's great.
Yeah,
because it's just so insane. This story.
Right? Exactly.
Yes. And that's part of Doctor Who's charm, is that you can't believe what you just watched.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you on that.
And that's what a lot of fans, especially myself, find so appealing about the show. That's great. All right, so to give a little background on the episode we're going to talk about, The Invisible Enemy, this was written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, also known as the creators of K9, who gets introduced in this story, which I'm sure is another reason you want to talk about this story, because we get the first K9.
Yes.
And this is directed by Derek Goodwin, and it was the second serial from season 15 that aired in October of 1977. So we're putting on a little miles on this one. It's almost going on 42 years, if you can believe it, this episode.
Did you say October of 1977?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yep, October 1977. So this would be post Star Wars, which came out in May 1977.
Yes, it came out on Star. I was one of those kids who stood in line.
Yep.
Those endless lines on May 25th of 1977.
I know, I'm showing my mileage. I was right there with you. So.
Yep.
But I'm one of those few that can say they saw the original Star Wars in the theater. So.
Yes, and my first daughter was born on May 25th, so there you go.
Oh, very nice.
Right?
Very nice. That's well planned on your part. That's excellent. All right, so obviously this is starring Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor, Louise Jameson as Leela, one of my favorite companions from the classic era, because Leela kicks all kinds of ass. I really like that. And John Leeson, introducing him as the voice of K9, but he also does the voice of the nucleus of the Swarm. So he kind of has a dual role in this one. He's the bad guy and the good guy.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
That's
see, this is one of the things you found out here on Next Stop Everywhere. You got all these little trivia bits. So while we're on the subject of trivia, I might as well mention that this story obviously was very heavily influenced by the movie Fantastic Voyage, which came out in 1966, and this was a movie starring Stephen Boyd, Raquel Welch back in the day, and Donald Pleasance, who, if James Bond fans may remember as Blofeld, the first Blofeld from You Only Live Twice. So another slight James Bond connection here to Doctor Who, slightly. And another trivia bit is that it wasn't decided until late into the production of Doctor Who to make K9 a full companion. Because apparently they decided, well, hey, we spent a lot of money on this prop. And this is back then, this was a lot of money for them, for the BBC. So they decided, okay, well, I guess we'll try and use him in multiple serials to kind of justify the budget expense. And so that's why K9 just was in more than one story. And then he obviously became a fan favorite. So they kept him around for several seasons up until Tom Baker's last season, with season 18, back in 1980, I believe. So 1981. So I just thought, it's kind of interesting that K9 wasn't really planned as a companion, but it worked out so well. And obviously he became such a major part of Doctor Who's history.
Well, and we're glad that he did, because he was a fun companion and character in the show.
Yeah. So when you watch K9 in School Reunion, the David Tennant era story, and that was your first exposure, I'm guessing, to K9, right?
Yes.
So then when you watched the classic episodes, you're like, oh, here's K9.
Yes, and I was really happy to see his origin story and watch all of those old episodes with K9 in it. Yes, indeed.
Excellent. Yeah, for whatever reason, he's such an appealing character. I mean, it's essentially just like, some motors and, some tin plating, but he has such a charm, and John Leeson really brings a lot to the role by making him much more, appealing as a character, and I think that's always great.
Yes, indeed.
All right, so let's run down the guest cast, and so let's see, the notable guest cast in this story, Michael Sheard, who played Lowe, who was the main guy with the bushy eyebrows that had been taken over by the nucleus. He's familiar to Star Wars fans because he played a notable character named Admiral Ozzel in The Empire Strikes Back, the Star Wars movie. So if you're a trivia buffs, look for him there. But you can also look for him in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was in that movie. And he played Hitler in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The Hitler that signed Indiana Jones's copy of the Grail Diary, thinking it was a copy of Mein Kampf that he was autographing, if you remember that movie.
I do.
But so it's kind of cool that he was in all those movies. He was also in several Doctor Who stories before this and after this. He played a character named Rose in the William Hartnell era story, The Ark. He was a character named Dr. Summers in The Mind of Evil, which is a John Pertwee story. And he played Lawrence Scarman, the brother of Professor Scarman, in Pyramids of Mars, another Tom Baker classic, which is highly recommended. He played the character Murgrave in Castrovalva. It's one of my favorite stories because that was Peter Davison's first story, and I'm a big Davison guy, the Fifth Doctor. And his last appearance in Doctor Who was as the headmaster in Remembrance of the Daleks, which was a Sylvester McCoy era story that was from the show's 25th season. So he was all in there all the way from the beginning of the classic era all the way to the end of the classic era.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then, like I said, on top of other big movies like Empire and Raiders and Last Crusade. So pretty cool, notable little actor that you may, just one of those guys, a good character actor that you go, hey, I've seen him somewhere before, that guy. And so that's, like if you happen to be watching those movies, you can go, hey, there's Lowe from The Invisible Enemy, which is always kind of cool. Some other actors in this one. Brian Grellis, who played Saffron, another guy who gets taken over by the nucleus. He was in the movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service. and that was from 1969, another James Bond classic. He played a character named Shepra in Revenge of the Cybermen, another Tom Baker story. And he played a character named the Megaphone Man in Snake Dance, a Peter Davison story. Then we have Professor Frederick Yeager as Professor Marius, the guy who invented K9. He was also in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but in a more minor role. And he also appeared in other previous stories. He played a character named Jano in The Savages, a William Hartnell era story, and he played Professor Sorensen in Planet of Evil, a Tom Baker story, a little bit before The Invisible Enemy. Jay Neal, who played Sylvie in this, was a guard in The Enemy of the World, a Patrick Troughton story, and he played a policeman in The Silurians, a John Pertwee story, and Pikeman in The Mask of the Mandragora, a Tom Baker classic, and a guard named Klimt in a less than classic episode from the Tom Baker era named Underworld. And interesting enough, he was also in an episode of Fawlty Towers. So if you're a John Cleese fan, a Monty Python fan, you probably would appreciate that.
Yes.
And lastly, Roy Herrick, who played Parsons, he was in a couple of previous stories. He played Jean in The Reign of Terror, which was a William Hartnell story during the French Revolution, and Zoanon in The Face of Evil. So that's our guest cast. More trivia for classic Doctor Who fans than anything else, but Marcus Sherrod is somebody of note that you may have seen elsewhere, obviously. All right, so without any further ado or a don't, if you're ready, we'll get into our main topics this week.
Okay.
All right, so topic number 1, the Fourth Doctor and Leela, obviously. This is one of the great pairings from the classic era. Tom Baker obviously is well regarded as everybody's top favorite Doctor from the classic era, but you also had Louise Jameson, who was one of his more popular companions after taking that actually was well appreciated after the departure of Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith. So it was kind of good that after losing Sarah Jane, we got a strong female companion in the form of Leela, which is really good. So I want to get your thoughts on the Fourth Doctor and Leela in this story. So what did you think about these two characters?
Well, I love Leela. I really appreciate her and enjoyed her as a companion in those early series. She's definitely one of my favorite companions from Classic Who. Just her strength and her tenacity and her willingness to do anything, and I really liked her character. So I feel like in this particular episode, the dynamic between the Doctor and Leela was a little bit off, and I could be wrong about that because I haven't really studied a lot of those episodes, although many of my favorite Tom Baker episodes are with Leela. I love Robots of Death and Leela's intro story, The Face of Evil.
Right.
Two of my favorites from the era. And I feel like maybe the Doctor was treating her differently and in this episode, but I could be wrong about that. But some of the interactions were a little bit disappointing about how he treated her.
I don't think you are. I think that that the Doctor seems a little more callous toward her, and like he's kind of very dismissive of her intelligence in the story. And,
yes,
and I'm gonna chalk that up to the writers, Bob Baker and Dave Martin.
Yes,
because this is still a few episodes in. She hadn't been around that long. She's been around for like maybe 4 stories, but it seems like that Bob Baker and Dave Martin didn't quite have a handle on her like some of the other writers from her era, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seemed like to me it seemed like they it was a main theme in the story that they were looking for why she was the reject, why she was not infected by the nucleus and the swarm, and why it had rejected her. And everybody was talking about how it was because of her intelligence that this thing, focused on the brain and on the mind and intelligence, and that was why it seemed like that was a big theme of trying to work it out. I don't feel like they ever really resolved that, but the doctor was kind of buying into that too.
Yeah,
And
there's that hint that well, the nucleus didn't bother with her because she wasn't as smart.
right, and they sort of set that up in the beginning, like when she was cowering in the corner, chewing on the corner of his scarf.
Yeah,
And it just didn't seem in character for her to
yeah,
be
right.
cowering in the corner, being all nervous about something. So it was weird.
Exactly. That was a very weird moment. I will give you that. I noticed that when I was doing my rewatch that yeah, it seemed, you know, Leela isn't the type to be, just huddled like that unless she had been severely affected by something.
All
But
right.
it seemed like, yeah, that maybe she was, um, that she was just, they were treating Leela, the writers, as this primitive who was just so intimidated by everything going on around her. And just because she's not as educated doesn't mean she's not smart.
No, and they did give her a few moments to shine,
Right.
I, I believe, and some of those are reflected in my favorite quotes that I've saved for later in that
Excellent. Yeah,
section.
yeah. Save those for later, but yeah,
Right.
she does get a lot of great lines in this story, and because Louise Jameson always has this great chemistry with Tom Baker.
Yes.
And if I don't know if you listen to any of the Big Finish audio adventures,
Yes.
but I'm just listening to one right now, and the mine runners, and just Baker. Even all these years later, this Tom Baker and Louise Jameson just play off each other so well, and it really comes through, and that's probably why a lot of fans like their pairing together.
Yeah, I do too. Big fan.
Yeah. Um, the Now we were talking about Leela she starts off, she's getting a little bit more of that kind of Pygmalion type character arc where the doctor's trying to educate her, like he's showing her how to write, and so
She's got the chalkboard and
yeah.
she's practicing writing her name.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, she's working on cursive, even though like hardly anybody here still does
Right.
cursive. But they didn't know that quite back in the 1970s, so I have to kind of let that slide. But Leela in this episode is very resourceful, and she's a fighter, and she doesn't go like, and she has this directness, which I find really refreshing, and probably the doctor does too. Um, her solution to everything is just like, well, why don't we just blow it up? And the doctor at first is like, well, you just can't blow it up. That's your reason for everything, or your solution for everything. But then he ends up using that solution later on in the story.
Yes, not only does he use that solution later in the story, but then he, of course, like the doctor does, pretends like it was his idea,
Right.
and it is sort of, you know, I don't know, that scene
Yeah.
at the end where he's petting canine and going,
Yeah.
yeah, oh, you should be happy then.
Yeah. Yeah. That was
Right.
it was kind of rare that, especially in the classic era, where the doctor would kind of take credit for the idea, and Leela, being as forthright as she is, she actually said, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? That was my idea, pal."
Yeah, you're
And
right.
then the doctor counters, "Well, I guess, yeah, like you said, I guess you should be happy with it then." And she didn't really have a retort for that. She was kind of flummoxed at that.
She seemed irritated to me.
Yeah, exasperated is probably the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but it was a great moment. So, and there's a lot of that, and
Uh,
so, as far as the doctor, he spends most of it kind of comatose, the actual doctor, because he's been infected by um, the nucleus. So it's up to his clone, which is created by Professor Jaeger, or excuse me, um,
Mary,
Professor Marius. Excuse me. I was thinking of Frederick Jaeger, the actor who played him. So
right.
yeah, Professor Marius, and so they create these clones, and it's a really interesting way they do this. And we'll probably talk more about that when we talk about Marius. But um, they go into this machine, they get shrunk down, they put them on like a microscope slide, and then scoop them up and inject them into the doctor's brain. And in a really interesting, I mean, I have to realize that, okay, this was 1970s special effects.
Right.
So they get injected into the doctor's bloodstream, what have you. For one thing, how did they breathe when they're ejected into the bloodstream? Because
Right.
they're surrounded by all this fluid, and the way they kind of did that, they had this kind of like green screen type special effect where Tom Baker and Louise Jameson are kind of like spinning each other around as they get their images are superimposed on this swirling vortex of water or what have you,
Right.
and it's kind of comical.
It's very comical, and I feel like we can't really, you can't go there because it's so absurd. The whole premise of it is so
Right,
absurd. I love how Marius, like, sucks them up with his syringe, like, literally off the floor,
right,
and then just injects them into on the slide and all that stuff. And then they go and they're cloned somehow.
right.
They're with their clothes on and the scarf and the hat and everything.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So it's just like, okay, how did that work?
right. Yeah, you can't. You can't. You have to dismiss all of that and just go with the story. Am I wrong?
No. A lot of Doctor Who, obviously, especially in the classic era, you just have to roll with it and
Yes.
just have fun with it. Just like whatever. Don't focus on it.
No, don't think
Um,
about it too much.
exactly. But you know, uh, Leela takes a quick shine to K9, um, because those two get kind of paired up as they're trying to fend off a lot of the nucleus-controlled zombies. And it was a good bonding moment, at least until K9 gets taken over. And so, without getting into more into K9, because we're going to talk about him, but
Okay.
what did you think of Leela's very quick fondness for K9 and wanting him to be a companion on the TARDIS?
I thought that their relationship was really sweet, and I felt that way all through all of the episodes with Leela and K9 after that, and their relationship was really sweet. Like it was clear that she was bonded with him, way more than the doctor,
Right.
and treated him like a good friend and a dog and all of that. So yeah, I loved their relationship very much.
Yeah, I thought that was really sweet, and she's practically insisting the doctor bring K9 aboard the TARDIS. Oh, can we, Doctor? Please, please. And,
Right.
and the doctor relents, but it was a good moment. All right. Anything else about the Fourth Doctor and Leela before we move on?
Oh,
Anything that stuck out to you?
no, just those things we covered. I mean, I've always loved them together, and but this episode seemed different, or like we
Yeah,
covered before. That
yeah.
it was
Oh,
different. So,
what did you think of the Fourth Doctor just kind of rummaging around his own mind, essentially? And
yeah, I just found that hilarious. That whole bit with him walking around in his own brain, uh, having that back and forth with Leela again. Some of that stuff is in my favorite quotes, and
yeah,
yeah, I just thought it was hilarious. It was absurd, and I loved every minute of it.
and Tom Baker obviously loves to chew the scenery, so this was
Right?
this was a great moment, and like a chance for the Doctor to really play up his own ego in this story.
Yes, like all of the bits with him, when they're inside of his brain, and Leela is, like, well, what's this? And he says, well, that's why my brain is so much superior to yours,
Right.
because it's, dangly bit thing that you just touched.
Yeah,
And yeah, those kind of things. It was very funny.
that is very funny. All right, so all right, we'll move. Why don't we move on then? Since we were talking about K9, that flows kind of into topic number two, where I want to talk about Canine and Professor Marius.
Yes.
So this is Canine Mark 1, where this is where they meet for the first time. And Canine's obviously this was his first story, but the way he's introduced is that he's just more of a computer that just happens to look like a dog.
Right.
But it's not until like later in the story where he gets paired with Leela that he kind of develops a little bit of a personality. So I want to get your thoughts on Canine and his creator, Professor Marius.
Well, when Marius first came on the scene and started speaking, I have to admit it was he sounded to me so much like the I can't remember what he was called, the evil little corporate dude from the Sunmakers.
Oh yeah, I know you're talking about. Yes,
the
controller or whatever his name was, or
whoever he was, the little tiny guy that turned into a sea sponge or something. Yeah, he is like the voice, the intonations, and the voice. It sounded just like that guy. And I remember being in the other room and hearing his voice and going, "That sounds like the guy from Sunmakers." But so that was a little.
Because he also talked with a bit of an accent.
Yeah. So I was sort of immediately put off by him and didn't like him,
right?
Just because of the way he spoke. But then
I mean, he was a good guy. It's not like he was.
Yeah.
He wasn't like he obviously was trying to help the doctor. He's going through all this trouble. He's trying to hold off the nucleus-controlled crewmen from capturing the doctor before the clone doctor has a chance to cure and stop the nucleus. But ultimately, he ends up getting taken over by the nucleus.
Yeah, well, that very first scene with him, it was just hard he was very dismissive of the doctor. I couldn't understand. I listened to it like 4 times trying to understand what he said, but he's just one of those space,
like a space hippie thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't remember the word that he used, but yeah, he was kind of dismissive and the crazy weird.
Oh, a space beatnik or something. Space Nick.
Space Nick, is that what it was?
Yeah, it was like a space beatnik. Yeah.
Right. So I didn't like him right at first, but then it became clear that he was a good guy and he was on their side and
right.
And
doing everything he could to stop the nucleus and and come up with a cure for the infection.
Sure. And then when he introduced Leela to K9, he talked about K9 as being his best friend and companion and all of that. And then, we warmed up to him. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Like, well, okay, you invented a K9. I guess you can't be all bad, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I thought was interesting is when they were filming this episode, if you notice, when K9 at first had that little bit of ticker tape coming out of his mouth.
Right, which I always found hilarious.
They leave it there for some reason.
Right.
Throughout the entire episode.
Like his tongue is sticking out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. It's like, like when he's trying to like fight off in this very tense moment, and he's got this ticker tape sticking out of his mouth, and I'm just like, oh, maybe you want to tear that off or something. It's kind of bugging me.
Right. Yeah, I felt like you gotta love K9 right away.
Right.
And I did. The idea of a computer.
Right.
Qualities of a loyal dog.
Right.
Although in this episode, it's clear that his loyalty seems only relevant to who he's told to be loyal to in the moment. And so...
Well, he's a computer, so he does what he's told.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting that, like, we first hear him call Professor Marius master.
Yes.
But then later in the episode about, when he's paired with Leela, he calls her mistress, even though she's not his mistress.
No.
So I thought that was really interesting.
But you mentioned the part about when Kanon got taken over, theoretically by the
nucleus. Yeah.
And they zapped him in the eyes.
I'm not sure how that worked either. Because he's a computer. How did that work?
I was very confused by that, and I thought, because he said, contact has been made, and he said, he called Lowe master in
Right.
that moment, but then and he went off to go shoot Leela, but clearly he didn't.
Well, I
And I was
think he
wondering,
tried. I think he was.
he faking it? Like, was he just faking it the whole time? And is he capable of that?
I don't think he was faking. I think he was just his like he talked about this that his whatever like control panel his hard drive essentially to use a modern
right,
term was kind of scrambled up, and as a result he he ended up having this conflict, and as a result the the canine ended up like he was fighting off this the entity of the nucleus inside him. So while he was trying to attack Leela, his attempt at resisting is what kind of like put that one shot like just off to the side, so he didn't strike her directly. And
right.
and then he talked about how he had to regenerate and I thought that was a really interesting turn of phrase. He
Yes,
regenerated his hard drive, for a lack of a better term, and
yeah,
he rebooted essentially,
right.
to use another modern term. He rebooted his system, probably turned himself off and on to reboot, and everything reset. So maybe it's just the fact that because he was mechanical, the nucleus wasn't able to achieve full control, only partial control.
Wasn't able to get hold of the mind brain interface because he may not have one like a person does. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
you would think the nucleus would have been like, well, that's a machine. I probably can't take that over. But he tried, and it worked sort of for a little bit.
Right.
But even though we're not quite sure how, but hey, again, it's Doctor Who. You roll with it.
That's right.
And but ultimately, yeah, he seems like he's actually eager to go. And Professor Marius ends up saying, and this is kind of like something that was kind of deleted, was that supposedly on his way back to Earth or whatever, K9 would have been too much weight to carry back. So that was the reason that Marius gave K9 to the Doctor and Leela, because he talks about, hey, you'd be doing me a favor if you took K9.
Yeah, I had written that down because when he first talked about when he was first introducing K9 to Leela,
Yeah,
and he said, I always wanted a dog back home,
right.
but wasn't able to have one, and I couldn't because of the weight or whatever.
Yeah,
And I thought, well, what's the difference between? I mean, Kanon's got to weigh as much as a dog, but then
right.
I
Like you've
realized,
got all this lab equipment. You're going to take that, but you're not going to take K9? What's up with that?
right. But then I realized that it was the weight, like probably on the spaceships traveling between, not on the station.
Right,
So
right.
he couldn't bring him with him, so he constructed him on the station, but then couldn't take him back on the spaceship back to Earth. So I decided that that made sense in the end.
Yeah.
And
See,
the doctor,
see, that's one of the things that fans do is like, okay, if the
right,
writer, what the writers gave us doesn't quite make sense, I'm gonna do my own head canon,
exactly.
and I'm gonna make it work, and that's what it's gonna be. That's the explanation in my own head,
Yep.
and so and it's gospel as far as I'm concerned. That's the explanation we should have gotten.
Yes, and so K9 and the doctor and Leela get to take K9 with them, and
Yeah,
whatever works for that,
yeah.
it's good to go.
And Marius gets a really good parting line as the episode ends about wondering if K9's TARDIS trained.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
even though we're not quite sure when Marius was told that, oh hey, this thing that I travel in, it's called the TARDIS, but somehow he knew that.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was an off-screen conversation.
Maybe that's a deleted scene somewhere, but
But yeah.
but it's still a funny line, regardless.
Yes.
It was good. All right. Now let's move on. Unless you have anything else about K9 and Professor Marius you want to talk about.
I think that's all I have in my notes about them. I feel like I'm missing something, but if I remember it, I'll
Okay.
come.
Yeah. Feel free to interject if you happen to remember what you want to talk about. No problem. So let's move on to topic number 3, the nucleus of the swarm, and might as well talk about Lowe in this one because he's kind of a prominent character in this story,
Right.
as the head guy that was taken over by the nucleus. So what's your thoughts on Doctor Who's favorite space prawn, giant prawn, the nucleus?
Well, of course, this just goes back to the whole super cheese. Love the super cheese.
Yeah.
Terrible, graphic. Like when he first encountered the nucleus when he was inside of his own brain.
Yeah.
And it looked like this sort of lump of coal with a.
Well, it's like a hooded, cloaked figure.
Yeah, with a claw and a weird eye, and I tried to come up with words to describe it and couldn't.
But he looked much cooler then when he was all covered up.
Right.
And you couldn't see him, and you're like, oh, this guy's kind of enigmatic, and he always looks like he's got this weird hand and whatnot.
Yeah.
But then when he gets brought out of the doctor's body and he's grown, although it's kind of interesting that even full grown, he's not as tall as anybody else. So it's this kind of like short monster.
Yes.
That's kind of flailing around with all these like little protuberances and just, all this things flinging around, and, the actor inside the suit just kind of fumbling around in it. And it looks pretty ridiculous,
Well,
to put it mildly.
Let's be fair. It's not any worse than the Wirren.
No.
With the green bubble wrap, green painted.
Right. Exactly. You're right.
It's in the same sort of.
Doctor Who has a good traditional bubble wrap.
Yes. So yeah, he was ridiculous, and I loved, just that moment when he was first. They sort of wheeled him in, and
right. He can't walk, so the guys like they have to kind of push him on this little trolley thing.
He's like a dolly.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a piano dolly or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yeah. It's just, there's really, I don't know what else to say about it other than it was brilliantly cheesy, and
yes.
What can you do?
I am so evil, but yet I cannot walk on my own. I have to be assisted.
Right. He falls in the category with the Wirren and the Crinoids.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
And we're going to be talking about the Crinoids next week, but I'll just leave that there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'm going to tease that. So.
That's a good story.
All right. So the nucleus, essentially, his whole deal is that he's looking to get back to Titan. He's trying just basically to kind of reproduce and spread his influence to spawn in these incubation tanks that were prepared by Saffron. And he's really into it. There's a scene in the 4th episode where he's so desperate to get to Titan, and he's having Lo just gun the ship as fast as possible. And he's like, going faster, I need you to go faster. And Lo kind of looks at him and goes like, well, if we go any faster, we're going to blow the ship up. And the nucleus is like, I don't care. Just go faster. And then Lo turns a dial, and then it's like, well, I guess Lo wasn't going as fast as he could, because he turns this dial and he goes even faster after that.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, there was a lot of funny things in this one. I want to just go back and to the very beginning, the opening of the episode, which of course is not about this particular category for
you.
But
that's okay.
I loved, it's one of the things that drew me to this episode again, was the opening, like the space graphics with the planets and the galaxies, and then they're in an asteroid field, and there's this spaceship that comes into view that looks like a wiener dog.
Yeah.
With little tiny legs and sort of an airplane tail and kind of a pig face, and
like kind of assembled from like various leftover bits from model kits.
Right. I loved that. I love that kind of stuff. And so yeah, it's another moment of super cheese for this episode. But on the other hand, I did love the scene with the Titan base when we're looking at the when the ship is landing
right
on the Titan base. I thought that whole the way they set it up and all the little miniatures and everything looked really cool. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, and I don't know if see on the DVD there is a option where you can have like better special effects.
Oh,
So which is the option that I did. So you get like better blaster effects, and and
oh,
and some better like outer space background stuff. So that
uh-huh.
kind of helps a little bit.
Right. So like the blaster is not just the sort of red light
Yeah,
that.
exactly. It's more like this plasma weapon,
Oh, cool.
energy
Oh,
plasma, kind of like Ghostbusters in the in the
right.
in the special effects version, or in the newer special effects version. But so it does help. So if you're watching this on DVD, I would definitely recommend the hit the special effects option. But
Okay.
the nucleus, of course, ends up um, getting taken out. Um, they end up essentially the solution, as we talked about, is that they basically blow it up. They blow up the base, Titan base,
Yeah.
and after the doctor locks the nucleus inside its incubation tank chamber, and
Right.
they basically hightail it out of there before things go kablooey, just in the nick of time. But it's an effective solution, and you have to kind of give credit to Leela for coming it up with that one and saving the day. So Leela saves the day, which is kind of nice, even though the doctor takes the credit.
Yeah, right. I enjoyed the philosophical conversation that the
Yep.
doctor was having, as he's walking around in his own brain looking for the nucleus, and when he finally finds it, and that conversation that they have about the right to live
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
right
That's a good point.
to himself. I thought it was a really good, one of those interesting moral dilemma
Yeah.
uh, sort of themes that Doctor Who likes to play with, and I thought that was very interesting. And yeah, that's what it comes down to. It's like, well, my right to survive and your right to survive, and who's going to win? Well,
Yeah.
today it's going to be the one who can blow up the nursery.
Exactly. Now the the now the doctor kind of tries to explain that moral dilemma. Since you brought it up, I appreciate you doing that. Because I did want to talk about that. He basically explains it to Leela that I don't have a problem with the nucleus being a virus, but I do have a problem with the fact that this virus is trying to take over other people and spread out throughout the universe.
Right. Not yet in the macro universe and the micro
Right,
universe, now in time.
right. So that's essentially the doctor's rationale. It's like normally I wouldn't kill this thing or want to get rid of it, but because it's got an overly developed sense of ambition, I have to do something about this.
Yeah, and he seemed really alarmed when he realized that because they were using his brain, that they would be able to somehow time travel.
Right. That was one thing I think the nucleus brought up was that, hey, oh,
Yeah,
you're a time lord, and
right.
so the doctor and that's probably why the doctor was so adamant about stopping the nucleus was that he realized after being taken over what true threat the nucleus posed,
Right.
and
Right.
what kind of danger he posed to the universe. So obviously it was a big deal to him at least. All right. Anything else about the story before we move on to our favorite quotes?
Um, I this was one of those episodes that I felt like, we were talking about the Low and all those other guys, that this is one of those episodes that all of the supporting cast were. I couldn't get interested in them. It seemed like Lowe was the only one, sort of in the beginning, who had an interesting personality. The rest of the guys were just sort of ho hum.
Right.
Nothing
Generic red shirts. Yeah.
exactly. And then Lowe was kind of interesting, but then when they all got taken over by the nucleus, they just turned into these zombies.
Right.
No longer had any personality, and it just felt like I had a really hard time connecting to any of them or even remembering which one was which. They
Yeah.
were
They
so
they were very interchangeable. I will give you that.
memorable. Oh, you know,
Yeah,
so
except there was like Lowe and then a bunch of other guys, and then you didn't really
yeah.
like you're not sure who's who then in that group.
Yeah, so that was different, but
Maybe if they had taken some time to like make you actually develop them as characters and then have them taken over, say around the second episode, you would have like appreciated like, well, hey, so and so character died eventually, or like, oh no, they got this guy. I like that guy,
right.
but they never quite did that.
No, they did not.
Yep. All right. Anything else before we move on?
What else before we move on? I'm just like looking through my little notes here. I had all kinds of things that we've gone way beyond, but I really enjoyed the all of the signs, the writing on the base that you notice
Oh,
that
yeah,
spelled,
yeah. I like the word exit.
yeah, EGSIT
Yeah,
and
like
I
like it's all spelled phonetically instead
spelled
of
phonetically right.
yeah.
The emergency and isolation were all spelled very.
Oxygen, I think was spelled on that big tank. I think it was,
Uh-huh.
or something like that. That it was spelled differently, and like
Yeah,
instead of GEN, it would have like SHEN or
it was
GHEN.
like isolation was spelled
Right.
ISALAYSHUN.
Yeah. Oh,
Isolation.
an emergency I saw was spelled differently.
Yeah.
Like it was like EMURG.
Oh, I have it written down.
Oh
It's
yeah,
spelled I M
I
U
am okay. Yeah.
R J I N C E E.
Right. See,
Emergency.
See, this is the future of where we're heading because everybody
Right.
that texts or goes on the internet or whatever and doesn't spell. See, this is the importance of grammar, people.
Yes.
That otherwise we're going to end up like these people, and they're going to have we're all going to have really weird signs because of not being able to spell things. So this is the importance of grammar and spelling.
Yeah, and yeah, I noticed that as well. And I guess the last thing was because we spent so much time seeing the doctor in a hospital setting
Yeah.
and on a hospital bed. I had this moment of thinking, why, oh why, are all of the hospital beds in all of science fiction everywhere just these like flat metal, you know,
Yeah.
things with like a pillow, barely a pillow or no pillow at all.
Right.
Even in Star Trek and those kind of things, in their fancy
Sick bays. Yeah.
sick bays, they're just laying on a metal slab, and it's like
Right.
that's
That can't be comfortable, can it?
what? No, it can't be. And I don't understand why they did that. Why they all do that?
Well, I have two-word response for that.
Okay,
Production budget.
there you go.
So
Too much for a blanket, huh?
exactly. Like
But also on that same note, watching Marius, like he's going to do open brain surgery, while the doctor still has the scarf wrapped around his neck, and
yeah.
there's like nothing sterile. There's no, it's
No,
just
nothing was sterilized. It's like
got his whole leather jacket on, and
yeah,
yeah,
we're not worried about giving the doctor any kind of other infection.
right.
So
Yeah, these kind of things make me laugh.
yeah. No, there's like a super sciencey, wyancy disinfection ray. Yeah, that's it. That
Right.
sterilized everything. All right. Let's move on to our favorite lines. So, Joe, it sounds like you got some favorite lines. So, why don't you go first?
Okay,
And
I wrote down a few of them.
okay.
So,
Why don't you do one and then I'll do one and we'll kind of alternate.
okay, very good.
All right.
The first one I wrote down was he says that the doctor says, the thing in my brain thrives on intellectual activity. Non thinking is the only way to shake it off, but I can't stay mindless for eternity.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That made me laugh.
Yeah, that was good. I like this exchange between the doctor and Leela, where the doctor goes, 5000 AD. That was the year of the Great Breakout. Leela's like, Great what? Doctor replies, when your forefathers went leapfrogging across the solar system on their way to the stars. Asteroid belt's probably teeming with them now. New frontiersmen, pioneers waiting to spread across the galaxy like a tidal wave or a disease. Leela responds, Why disease? I thought you liked humanity. And the doctor replies, "Oh, I do, I do. Some of my best friends are humans. When they get together in great numbers, other life forms sometimes suffer."
Yes, I liked that quote too.
Yep. So the doctor kind of puts a dark spin on that discussion really at the end, and I thought that was really interesting. So I thought it was good. All right, you got any more, Joe?
I do. Probably more than you want. So,
Well, we'll do a
so,
few, and we'll see how time goes because we're kind of starting to run a little long. So we'll do a few here.
oh, okay. Well,
Choose your favorites.
okay. My favorites. Let's see here. Well, the next one on my list here was when the Doctor and Leela come out of the TARDIS on the Titan base, and they sort of look around, and then they finally notice the body on the floor, and Leela says, "He's still warm." The Doctor says, "Don't be gruesome." And Leela says, "I'm a hunter." The Doctor says, "Well, you're a savage." Leela says, "Perhaps, but I'm not ashamed of what I am. And I tell you, Doctor, I can smell danger." And that was one of those moments where, Leela stood up to him and dismissed his sort of dismissal of her.
Right.
And so I enjoyed that, her saying, "I'm not ashamed of what I am."
And that's one of the things that, especially starting with Sarah Jane, I think that I'd love to see the companion standing up to the Doctor, and
Yes,
not just putting up with his crap, the Doctor just being so arrogant and presuming things, or I like the strong-willed companions. I really like to see that they're not pushovers.
yes,
And I think it's the stronger companions that fans remember most throughout history as years have gone. So that's good. I liked another exchange between Leela and the Doctor. Louise Jameson and Tom Baker are so good. I can't resist a good Doctor and Leela exchange. Leela says, "Doctor, why don't we just blow up Titan? Nucleus, breeding tanks, everything?" And the Doctor replies, "That's your answer to everything, isn't it? Knock it on the head." Leela replies, "Effective, isn't it? Smash it once and for all? Well?" The Doctor replies, "This is a hospital, not an arsenal."
right. Yeah, I enjoyed that one too. And on sort of in that same genre, my
Right.
next one is when the Doctor walks into the room towing K9 by a leash, and Leela says, "Did you kill it?" And the Doctor says, "No, I lost the antibodies." And Leela says, "What?" And she says, "Never mind, Doctor, I found the answer." Doctor says, "You have?" She says, "Yes, knife him in the neck."
That's a great one. I love that one. That's a good one. Last one I have is another Doctor and Leela exchange, where Leela says, "K9's breaking up. My blaster's finished. What are we going to do?" The Doctor replies, "Should we try using our intelligence?" And Leela replies, "Well, if you think that's a good idea."
Yes, I had that one written down too, and I was saving it because I kind of figured you probably did. And
I'm sorry I stole yours.
No, I have too many of them. So,
All right. Why don't you give me one last one and then we'll move on.
okay, which is going to be my last one?
Make it a good one.
Okay, which is the best here? So, I love the bit. They're all Doctor and Leela exchanges. This one says, Leela says, "What is this?" He says, "It's a reflex link." This is when they're inside of his brain.
Yeah.
And he says, "Whereby I can tune myself into the Time Lord intelligentsia. Thousands of superbrains in one." Leela says, "Well, why don't you do it now?" And the Doctor says, "What?" "Oh, I lost that particular faculty when they kicked me out." "Oh," and then he points like to distract her and says, "Look." And Leela says, "Kicked you out?" And he's like, "Oh, look."
Yeah.
And just completely deflects from that whole conversation.
That's great.
And
Yeah, that's like one of those what in the world can that be? Look over there. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great. All right. So, what's your rating for this story?
Well, I rated it 7.5 tin dogs, and I'm choosing tin dogs to honor K9.
Right, because this was his first episode. Yeah, so
Right.
I'm glad you did that. I'm glad. Now, I'm just a little more generous than you. I actually gave this one 8. 8 out of 10 microscopic Doctor clones. I'm going to give this one.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, so, but I like this one, and like you said, it's cheesy fun. There's a lot to it, and of course, it's always fun. Tom Baker, Louise Jameson, and we get the first Canine episode. How can you not like that?
Exactly. That's what I thought.
So very cool. All right. So without any further ado, let's move on to my reverse the polarity segment. So we're gonna reverse the polarity, but then we're gonna reverse it again because we're going forward in time, not backward. So we're gonna go forward to. I'm gonna recommend, if you like this story, I would recommend The Waters of Mars.
Oh,
The
well,
third.
that's not my guess. I'm
Oh,
excited to hear what you
what,
say.
what was your guess?
My guess was Into the Dalek.
That's a good one. I was tempted to do that. That was my number two choice, and then I found this story.
Okay, good.
But yeah, The Waters of Mars. If you remember this one, this was the third TV special from 2009, written by Russell T Davies and Phil Ford, where the 10th Doctor arrives on Mars. He's still traveling solo, and his companion of the special type attitude, and he arrives in 2059 on Mars near humanity's first Martian colony, Bowie Base 1. So points for the David Bowie shout out. And he dons a spacesuit to walk into the base where he's detained by the crew led by Captain Adelaide Brooke. And if you remember that story, as they interrogate him, he discovers that today is a fixed point in time where the base will explode, killing the entire crew, but their death will inspire Adelaide's granddaughter to explore the stars. This is our dilemma here. So he tries to stay uninvolved, but Adelaide forces him to assist her, responding to an alert from the remote biodome, where it just so happens two crewmen in a zombie-like state, that sounds a little familiar, are generating copious amounts of water. Because hey, it's The Waters of Mars, that's the title. One of Adelaide's team gets infected, so we have somebody getting infected. They quarantine her while sealing off the biodome. And from observation, they discovered that the infection is by an intelligent virus. So just like in The Invisible Enemy, we have an intelligent virus. This one's called the Flood. And the Flood now seeks to get to Earth. So presumably they can spread their influence there. The Doctor suspects the Flood were sealed in the glacier the base was using for water by the Ice Warriors eons ago, and a bad filter allowed the virus to infect the crew. Adelaide realizes that the remaining crew haven't yet touched that source of water and are uninfected, and orders that crew to evacuate to their rocket back to Earth while setting the base to self-destruct. Because, hey, like Leela said, if there's a base that's being infected, let's just blow it up. So that's very a lot like The Invisible Enemy. So before departing, the Doctor is forced to explain to Adelaide what he knows and why he can't get involved. However, the Doctor hears cries of help, and as the infected crew break the biodome seal and attack the central hub with massive amounts of water, infecting several others. The rocket's pilot gets infected, but he sacrifices himself by causing the rocket to self-destruct to strand the Flood, at the cost of stranding the remaining crew as well. The Doctor rescues Adelaide and the last of the surviving crew, Yuri and Mia, via the TARDIS moments before the base destructs. He returns them to Earth, arriving outside Adelaide's home. Yuri takes the shocked Mia away, while Adelaide demands to know why the Doctor saved them and risked changing history. The Doctor insists that he can break the laws of times to save the little people, calling himself the Time Lord Victorious. Dun dun dun! Adelaide becomes indignant and warns him, "I don't care who you are, the Time Lord Victorious is wrong," before stepping into her home and killing herself. So her solution is suicide. The Doctor is shocked, realizing history hasn't changed, save for knowledge of the base's fate from Yuri and Mia. Suddenly, Ood Sigma appears on the street, doing this big prophetic warning thing, and visibly shaken, the Doctor sees this as a message and realizes, "I've gone too far," and asks if it's time for him to die. Unresponsive, Ood Sigma suddenly vanishes, and the Doctor staggers back into the TARDIS, to the ringing of the cloister bell, which of course is not a good sign. And with a defiant no, he operates the controls and travels who knows where until the end of time, his final story. So, so if you liked Invisible Enemy, this one's a little more serious than Invisible Enemy, but if you're way into that whole intelligent virus thing, I definitely recommend it. So what do you think?
The Waters of Mars is a great story. I love it.
Yep. So
that was a good pick. I
well,
didn't think of that one in the.
well, thank you. I'm glad you approve. But Into the Dalek was probably be my runner-up for that. So after you watch The Waters of Mars, watch Into the Dalek, the Peter Capaldi story.
Yes.
That's a good one too. All right. So we do have a lot of listener feedback. So let me pull up the Gmail real quick because I know we're running long here. So I want to get through this a little quickly. And come on, there we go. So first we had, writing in about the Invisible Enemy, we had Holly from Wisconsin. So hi, Holly. She writes in, hey all. Hey, Holly. The first appearance of K9. Love how he's introduced and how Dr. Marius and the doctor, along with Leela, get along to try to figure out the mystery of the furry eyes, aka nucleus. K9's personality quirks haven't changed much in his later incarnations, which is very nice. Nucleus's form made me rethink eating shrimp, right? Other than that, it was a good story. Love the ending with Dr. Marius wondering if K9 is TARDIS trained. I'll wrap it up here. Holly from Wisconsin. So thank you, Holly. Always great to hear from you. And then we had Paul from Australia writing in about the Invisible Enemy, where Paul says, hi, Charles and Joe. So, hi, Paul. So, Paul gave you a shout out, Joe.
Hey, that was nice.
And what's not to love about this story with a fantastic voyage into the doctor's brain to stop the nucleus of the swarm? I see what you did there, Paul. And the introduction of K9, just perfect. Imagine how, with today's CGI, how much better the creature could be rendered. It's pretty bad in the episode. Smiley face. Yeah, it is. But, that's part of the charm, right? It was good to see Leela again. I had forgotten how much I like her character. She was such a contrast to Sarah Jane, but a good contrast. She's not obviously a replacement for Sarah Jane, but she's strong in her own right, and I really like that. Sending my kindest regards, Paul. P.S. Okay, Charles, are we possibly watching a story next time about a plant trying to take over the world? Perhaps. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Paul likes to tease. And then we have John Takis writing in. John is going to be speaking with me next week. So John apparently wants to get a jump on things here. And he goes, hey guys, just want to add my 2 cents about the Invisible Enemy, a.k.a. Doctor Who and the Fantastic Voyage, LOL. Everybody's making the Fantastic Voyage comparisons, obviously. Such a fun story, which also introduces us to K9 that has a few more nods to the 1966 movie, Fantastic Voyage. The Doctor and Leela, now cloned, enter the Doctor's body and face a lot of the same dangers as do the crew of the Proteus from that film. Although the crew of the Proteus doesn't have to square off against the nucleus, the giant space prawn. After all is said and done, both teams exit the body through the tear duct and continue on. More than a few similarities, but in the Invisible Enemy, we do get an eventual new member of the TARDIS crew. Keep up the great work. Can't wait to talk to you about some Doctor Who, John Takis. So thank you, John, and looking forward to talking about our next episode with you next time. So, and that, since we're on the subject of what we're going to talk about with John, we're going to talk next time on Next Stop Everywhere, we're going to talk The Seeds of Doom, which is the one with the crinoids that you were talking about earlier, Joe.
Yeah.
And this was my very first exposure to Doctor Who. I didn't watch this story in full, but this was the first story that I came across flipping channels. You come across it on PBS, and it was on like a Saturday afternoon or evening or something. And it was one of those that just made me go, WTF am I just watching?
Right.
Like I had no idea what it was, and I'll get more into that when we talk about the episode next time. But this was the first time I had any kind of experience with Doctor Who. And it's probably one of the things that's stuck in my brain all these years later. That those first fleeting images of craziness and British TV just burned into my brain. And I'm glad I'm going to be able to talk about that.
That's great. Love the crinoids.
Yep. So everybody pull out your DVDs of the Seeds of Doom, because we're going to be talking about that next time. And let's see here. Let's see. So if you want to be like Holly or Paul or John, and you want to reach us here at Next Stop Everywhere, you can reach us at nextstopeverywheresmg@gmail.com. That's Next Stop Everywhere SMG for Southgate Media Group at gmail.com. Or you can reach us on the Twitter machine at Next Stop SMG on Twitter, or Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast on Facebook. We definitely appreciate you liking us and following us there. And while you're at it, go ahead and check us out at Next Stop Everywhere podcast on the Instagram, as all the kids are doing these days. Hopefully we'll get some more content up there. Karen's been out, sadly, but hopefully she'll be back soon. Fingers crossed, and have some content, more content up on that. But Jo, since you're here, do you have anything you want to shamelessly plug while you're here?
I do not. I have nothing to shamelessly plug. I am not.
No Facebook or Twitter or anything?
Well, I can be found on Facebook. Jo Karelja is the name, but I don't do anything professionally, or seriously there. It's just me and keeping in touch with my kids and such. So
excellent.
So nope, nothing to plug.
All right. Well, I just thought I'd give you the chance in case you wanted to. But yeah, if you're a Doctor Who fan, I'm sure Jo would love to talk Doctor Who with you.
Yes, I don't have enough people to talk Doctor Who with, and I can talk Doctor Who all day long.
There you go. So, well, you came to the right place, obviously, and you did such a great job here. I'm really happy that you joined us here today.
Well, I'm glad that I thank you so much for making contact, as they
contact has been made.
Contact has been made, which I had fully intended to say to you when we first started the podcast.
Oh, those missed opportunities.
Right. Somehow it didn't happen. And I have 5 extra pages of notes that we didn't even cover, and that's how much I can talk about Doctor Who. It went by so fast.
I know. We're working on like an hour and 15 minutes already. So
it was so much fun, and I really appreciate it. And thank you. And I hope I did okay. And didn't
you did a great job. And you're welcome back anytime if you want to talk more Doctor Who. We'd love to hear from you again. And everybody, check out Jo, and give her a nice round of applause, because I thought she did a really great job. So kudos to you, Jo.
Thank you, Charles.
I hope you had fun, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. All right.
Did.
All right, cool. So I'm glad to hear that. So everybody, come on back next time for episode 136 with John Takis as we talk The Seeds of Doom. And it's going to be a fun one. Trust me on that. I'm going to make sure. So everybody, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of our listeners and all of our guest hosts like Jo. Thank you so much for helping us out with Karen out and Jesse having to scale things back because of his wife. We really appreciate you, Jo, and we appreciate everybody else that's filled in for us. And if you want to be like Jo and you want to decide you want to do your own little Next Stop Everywhere gig, drop us a line here at the Gmail, and obviously Jo's a witness to this. We'll get you set up so that you can be a nice co-host, special guest companion. So, Jo, any final words before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. Just thank you again, and I love your show, and it was a pleasure and a privilege for me to be a part of it. So thank you again, and hi to all the listeners. Hello. And goodbye.
Well, hopefully not forever. Hopefully we'll have you back someday soon.
I'd love to.
All right. So everybody, with that, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye, everybody.